Yesterday we discussed the Chiv Tzitzis and the Iser Kilayim, and we discussed the fact that in Kilayim we have two categories of Iser. We had the Levisha, the active Levisha, we had the Halah. We said that they're fundamentally different. The Iser Levisha on the one hand is the Maisa Levisha, the Iser of Halah is the Hanos Levisha. And yet, despite that all, the Rambam has only one set of Malchus. And the Rambam only counts Kilayim as one Avera. And we would have thought that in the counting of the Lavin, since there are two different Parshios here, two different Psukim, and two different Maisa Isur, one is essentially different than the other, then the Rambam should have counted them as two sets of Malchus in two sets of Lavin in Taryag and two sets of Malchus. We discussed at great length Rav Shach's insight that sometimes what the Torah is doing is it offers you an expansion of the scope of the mitzvah, the scope of the Avera, the Maisa Avera, but not directly and explicitly, but through a drasha. And when that happens, then the drasha is meant to expand the original law. So here, in the case of Allah, the Torah is indicating that we should expand the definition of the law of Kilayim to include not only a Maisa Levisha, but even something that's less than a Maisa Levisha. It falls short of a Maisa Levisha, but it is a Hanas Levisha, and that's called Halah. But that Iser Halah is part and parcel of the original law of Lo Silbash Shatnez. And that was comparable to the case of Basar B'Cholov, where the Torah repeats the Iser Lo Savashel to indicate and expand the Iser of Basar B'Cholov to include Hana, but you would not get Malchus for Hana because Hana is just an expansion of the original law. Now, we want to discuss Rabbi Yishmael, and specifically a Tosfos in Rabbi Yishmael. And once again, as I said to you yesterday, there's a lot of technicality here, and we're going to try to see if we can overcome those barriers, those challenges. Rabbi Yishmael is of the opinion that you can justify the smichus and the drosh of smukin between Losil Bashatnis and Gedilim Pasalacha because of mufna. And what makes it mufna? It's because Rabbi Yishmael understood that a beged, by definition, according to the Torah, and wherever it appears in the Torah, is made up of tzemer and fishtin. Therefore, the Torah did not have to explicitly mention tzemer fishtin. As long as the Torah says beged, that would have been sufficient. Therefore, tzemer fishtin becomes mufne. It's extra, it's redundant, and therefore we can use it as the basis for a smukin to teach me that the essay of tzitzis overrides the losaseh of kilayim. So that's called Tana Debei Rabbi Yishmael, which is quoted here on Daf Daled Amud Beis. Now we see clearly that the mitzvah of tzitzis is matir the Iser Kilayim, and Tosfos now has a kasha. He says, how do we know for sure that the mitzvah of tzitzis, of placing tzitzis of tzemer and tying them down to a beged of pishtan, is matir the Iser Kilayim? This lechora does not fare very well in the light of a sugya in Masechet Menachos on Daf Lamed Tes. The Gemara says there on Daf Lamed Tes that if not for the drasha of Smuchin to teach us the head of Kilayim Tzitzis, we would have no source for what's called Kesher Elyon, which means that when we attach the tzitzis into the beged, it's not enough that we thread the tzitzis through the hole, but we have to tie at least one knot. That's the minimum. There are many other knots that we talk. That's all lehidur mitzvah, but the critical knot is called the kesher elyon. that ties down the chutei tzitzis to the beged. What is the source for that requirement of kesher elyon in tzitzis as a doraisa requirement? It's derived from the fact that the Torah had to be matir kilayim b'tzitzis. We needed a special drasha. If not, in the absence of that drasha, we would have assumed that you cannot attach tzitzis of tzemer to a beged of pishtan because you're violating the Isser of Kilayim. And you would only be violating the Isser Kilayim in the case of Hatolas tzitzis al beged shel pishtan if we assume kesher elyon doraisa. Because the Torah says, shatnez means tzemer pishtan yachtov, and the two threads of, or the two materials, shall we say, of wool and linen have to be tied down together. And in the case of tzitzis, they have to be tied down together. So the very premise that underlies the clash, the assumption of a clash between tzitzis and kilayim is kesher elyon doraisa. So that the Isser Kilayim of Tzemer Ufishta Mechubarim attached to each other would be dependent, the violation of that Isser would be dependent on Kesher Elyon. So therefore, since we derive a halacha of Esei Dochalosa, so that tzitzis overrides Kilayim from tzitzis, meaning that when he puts the kutim on the beged, he is violating the Isser Kilayim, and now the Torah is saying Esei Dochalosas. It must mean that the chutei tzitzis have to be mechubarim lebeged, just like Kilayim requires mechubarim, and that's called kesher elyon doraisa. And in the light of that premise, that kesher elyon doraisa, we have an absolute head-on collision between the mitzvah tzitzis and the Isser Kilayim in the case of beged pishtan. And hence the Torah found it necessary to teach and to establish that the essay of tzitzis overrides the lotus of kilayim. Now, I want to read to you the following line. He says, "Ma maksha Gemara shel Rabbi Shmuel ein tzarich b'smichus haparshiyos." The Gemara is going to raise a question that, according to Rabbi Shmuel, since we know that a beged, and the Torah says you have to wear tzitzis on a beged by definition is tzemer ufishtan, because that's how Rabbi Shmuel, based on the parsha of Nigei B'godim, derives the conclusion that a stam beged in the Torah is tzemer ufishtan. So the Gemara now raises the following question: why does Rabbi Shmuel need the smichus haparsha? Tosaf says, I don't understand the Gemara's kasha. What do you mean, why do we need the smichus haparsha? Ma maksha Gemara shel Yishmael ein tzarich b'smichus haparshos. Halo lule zos. If not for the smichus haparshos, hoyamamida b'smitzvus tzibel v'she'ein bo Isser Kilayim below kesher elyon. Without the derivation of Esei Dochalosas, and the premise that underlies the principle of Esei Dochalosas in tzitzis and kilayim, namely that there is a head-on collision, and these two, tzitzis and kilayim, are mutually exclusive, then we must be assuming kesher elyon doraisa. So I need the drasha and the smichas haparshos ki'ilu to be matir tzitzis b'kilayim and teach me that I need a heter of tzitzis b'kilayim. Logically, I would not know that there's a need for a heter of tzitzis b'kilayim, because maybe in tzitzis all I have to do is, as we said before, just insert the chutim into the hole of the beged. I don't need to tie it down to the beged. And therefore, I would never be able to derive the conclusion that kesher elyon is doraisa. The entire source, says the Gemara Menachos Lametes, for kesher elyon doraisa is the fact that the Torah taught me that essay is dochalosas. And that premise that there's a clash between essay and losas in the case of tzitzis b'kilayim is based on kesher elyon doraisa. Then even Rabbi Shmuel, despite the fact that he could have other sources for the fact that tzitzis as a beged requires tzemer upishtan, I would still need the smichas haparshios to teach me that kesher elyon is there. So far, so good. Now the going gets rough. Tosa says, "Hey Shlomar, here's my answer to this question. Es haheder shel kelayim v'tzitzis, efshal lilmod gami ma shenemar tzemer upishtim yachdav." We don't need the smichas haparchios to derive the matir of tzitzis in kelayim. I can derive the fact that tzitzis is mutar b'kelayim from the word yachdav. How does he get that? Sharei miyuter tevazu. The Gemara later on says that the word yachdav is superfluous. And from that yitur, hochicha Gemara, shetchifa achas eno chibu. That the word yachdav means not that you tied one knot connecting the chut of tzemer with that of Krishna, but you tied a minimum of two knots, meaning two tfiros. Ein chibur, there's no such thing as chibur of yachdav without a minimum of two tchifos. Now, if you would assume that the toe is not matir kelayim b'tzitzis, then this entire drush of yachdav would be totally unnecessary. Why? Betel shel pishta behechrek sheyesh ofen b'kir mitzvah zu b'li lavar al isur kilayim. Unbelievable. Tosa is saying that from the very fact that the Torah went out of its way to be machayev a chut of tchelas attached to a beged shel pishtan, it means that we could have circumvented the Avera of Kilayim. How could you have possibly circumvented the Avera of Kilayim when you're putting a chut of tzemer onto a beged of pishtan? And the answer is that he did it with tchifa achas. And tchifa achas would not be considered a chibur of yachdav as far as kilayim is concerned. So he could have his cake and eat it. He can attach the chut of tzemer, and we'll call it tcheles, with one tchifa to a beged shel pishtan without violating the Isur Kilayim. Why do you assume that we need to be matir tzitzis b'kilayim? Imkain ain't sorch b'yichud. I'm sorry, b'yachdav l'lamed zos. I know that tzitzis requires two tchifos from the very fact that you had to be matir tzitzis b'kilayim, because again, I don't need that heter if tzitzis would be sagigwe b'tchifa achas. So therefore, once again, the word yachdav becomes superfluous. ומכך שנכתב יחדיו בהכרח שחיבה תורה בציציס אף באופן שעוברים על עולם של כליים. The reason why the Torah added the word yachdav is to teach me that there are scenarios. No, that's not the right formulation. Let me take that back. That every scenario, not that there are scenarios, but every scenario of fulfilling my obligation vis-a-vis tzitzis requires overriding the law of kilayim, because I cannot fulfill the mitzvah tzitzis without shtei tchifos, because otherwise it's not a chibur. Umikach shenichtav yachdav. What is the extra word yachdav doing over there in the parsha? Is behechrech shechiva Torah b'tzitzis, even though he is going to do two tchifas to attach the chelas of tzemer to the beged of pishtan, and therefore he's going to override and violate the Isur Kilayim. Al kein mitzrach yachdav ki beladav ein lo makar lekach she'ein Isur Kilayim ela b'shtei tchifos. Okay, so let's put this here on the side of it. We'll come back to it later. And I want to show you something else. The Gemara, if you recall, Adaf Hey, Amid Aleph, offered the possibility that we can derive Esei Docha Losaseh from the fact that the Torah, in the case of Mitzorah, permitted, for the sake of the mitzvah of Taras Mitzorah, the Avera of Baltakif, when the Mitzorah at the end of his Torah does a Hakofa, a Tiglachas Harosh, he would, under normal cases, be violating the Isser of Pa'as, Lo Takifu Pa'as Roshechem. And now, because of the mitzvah of Tiglachas Mitzorah, we override the Lo Taseh of Lo Takifu Pa'as Roshechem. So this now, according to this Havamim in the Gemara later on is to be rejected, is the source for Esei Docha Losas. And the Gemara is going to say that we're talking about a Lo Taseh Shein Shav Bakol because the Noshim are not included in this Lo Taseh, and that gives it a sort of a secondary status. Now, let's learn for a moment a Gemara in Masechet Nazir, and this is our Daf Nun Zayin, Ka'osios Nazir, right? So Nazir Daf Nun Zayin. What do we have here? The Gemara establishes that regarding the lav of Lo Sakifu, which is written in plural, we derive the conclusion that there are two violations of this Isur of shaving one's head. One is the Makif, and the other is the Nikaf. In other words, not only does the Makif, who did the action of Akaf, if he did it on someone else, so Ruvain was Makif, Rosho Shel Shimon, Ruvain certainly violates Isur Lo Sakifu, but even Shimon, if he complies, violates this law. Now the Gemara quotes Rav Huna. Rav Huna says that when you are makif a katan, even though the katan is not included in the lav of nikaf, but nevertheless he's considered a nikaf to generate a chiyuv malchus on the makif. So a makif is a katan chayav. Rav Ada bar Ava holds no. There's a hekesh between makif and nikaf. If the nikaf is not a bar chiyuva, then ipso facto the makif is pot. Tosa says the following: according to Rav Ada bar Av, that we have a hekesh between the makif and the nikaf, and therefore, if the nikaf is not a bar chiyuva, he's a cut on the makif is not a bar chiyuva. What about the reverse case, Esther? Let's say the makif is not a bar chiyuva. The makif was an isha, and the nikaf was a bar chiyuva. Then the nikaf should be parted. Just like you parted up the makif, because in the case of makif zakat and the katan, the nikaf is parted. So too, in a case where the makif is parted, the nikaf therefore is parted, based on this hekesh. If that be the case, then why does the essay of Mitzorah override the lav fakaf? We're talking about essay do halosas in the mitzvah of Mitzorah. Vektosis harei efshel l'kaim yishneah. You can have your cake and eat it too. Why? Let's have the makif be an isha, or for that matter, a katan or a guy, I don't know, whatever it is. And therefore, the nikaf is part. In this case, the Mitzorah, within the context of his mitzvah, he can be mitar himself even though his hair is being shaved without violating the Yisrael Takif, by asking a makif who is not a bar chiyuva to implement hakafa. Because since Rav Ada bar Ava has the equation between makif and nikaf, therefore the nikaf will not be chai, meaning the Mitzorah. So the Torah fulfills his mitzvah by having someone else who's not a bar chiyuva implement the akafa, and he doesn't violate the Isra akafa. So Tosfos comes up with a radical chiddush. In order to answer this question, he assumes, against everything he assumed in the Havamina, that in the context of Rav Ada bar Abba's hekech between the makif and the nikaf, it only goes in one direction. Namely, if the nikaf is not a bar chiyuva, then the hekech is teaching me that the makif is pot. But the other way around, it's not going to work. Ikar akasu bazeh, bo lesser nikaf. We thought that when we read the pasuk and the pasuk says lo takifu, we thought that the pasuk was addressing the makif. Says Tosfos, no, the Torah is addressing the nikaf. Lo takifu means thou shalt not have your head shaved. And if the ikar ha-pasuk and the lav is primarily addressing the nikaf, then if the nikaf is a bar chiyuva, that's enough, regardless of whether the makif is a bar chiyuva or not a bar chiyuva. So that's the shita of Tosfos and Masechet Yevamot. Now on this, we have a kasha of the Beis Halevi. The Beis Halevi says the following. He says the following. Nikama, even after Tosfos' answer, Adayin yesh lesar al hagadol la kifo mishum iser hamak. Let's see if we can figure out his kasha. He says, Yakifenu katono isha, v'afsha nikaf ben kach over. But mikomakom yimana, with an ayin at the end, yimna iser hamakif. Meaning that essay docha losas is dechuya, it's not hutra. And to the extent that we can achieve the essay without violating a lotus, that's exactly what we have to do. And therefore, why would he apply essay docha losas to allow Ruvain to be makif Shimon? Shimon is the mitzora. We should ask Ruvaina. I don't know, is such a name. But we should ask a woman to be makif Shimon. Now, even though Tosfos says that Shimon the Mitzora would violate Bal Takif as a nikaf because the Ikar Lav is on the nikaf, but nevertheless, why invite Ruvain to be makif Shimon and have both Ruvain and Shimon violate the Lav of Bal Takifu? Ruvain b'toras makif and Shimon b'toras nikaf. At least Chach set it up so that there's no violation of the Isur Makif. We never found that the halacha of Mitzora and the Taras HaMitzora would require that the Makif be a Lav Bar Chiyuva. We assume that essay don't chalosas. Why? Why should the essay of the Nikaf override the Lav of the Makif when you can set up a makif and achieve the essay without violating Bal Takifu if we set up a makif who's not a bar chiyuva? So Tosfos really only answered half of his question. Yes, we know that we're going to have to override the law. And essay dochalosa here applies because no matter who the makif is, even if he's not a bar chiyuva, she's not a bar chiyuva, the nikaf will still be chai. and therefore you must assume essay dochlos. I grant you that, says basically. But what I don't understand, and that perplexes my mind, is why don't you require at least to circumvent the avera, the violation of the makiv, and require that an isha or a katan or a guy should be the makiv? And he suggests an answer which he absolutely rejects, till he finally settles down on his answer. He says, Ein Lomar, don't give me the following answer. Shalashitas Rav Ada Bar Ava Hukash Makif L'Nikaf Umi Achar Shehutar Isur Nikaf, right? Because as far as the Nikaf is concerned, it's a no-win situation. He absolutely has to override the lav of a Nikaf for the sake of Taras HaMitzvah of his mitzvah. Is therefore, once you apply the Essay Dochalosa, then now we can be matter the Isser on the Makif. So we'll go back to our scenario of Ruvain, who's a Gadol, he's a Bar Chiyuva, he's enjoined from cutting off the hair of his head. He'll be Makif Shimon, who is a Mitzorah. And even though the Essay Dochalosa only applies to Shimon and not to Ruvain, we can apply it to Ruvain as well. Why? Because we have a hekage between the makif and the nikaf. That's Rav Baram. In the context of that hekage, we should say that just like the nikaf applies essay dochalosa to override his lav as a nikaf, we can now override the lav on the makif because there's a hekage between the makif and the nikaf. Just like the case we spoke about, according to Rav Barava, if a gadol is makif a katan, Rav Barava says that he's not chayav, because since the nikaf is not chayav, the makif is not chayav. And in Essay Dochalosas, in the case of Mitzorah, the nikaf is not chayav, and therefore the makif shouldn't be chayav. It's a wonderful answer. But he doesn't buy it. Why? L'fichalo potar Rabbi Adavar Ava el b'makif es hakatan. She'eno bar chiyuva kol ikar. Ma she'enkein b'mitzorah shu bar chiyuva v'lo huter ela be'akofa zu zu lo huchalo legamre el dechuya hi mipnei ha'esei. And in the case of dechuya, we're only going to apply dechuya for the person that has the mitzvah to be dolcha. But as far as the makif is concerned, since he doesn't have the mitzvah, he's not a mitzorah, he cannot be dolcha his law. So now we're back to square one. Let's go over the kasha of Beis Halevi. Tosas says that the ikar alav is on the nikaf. And hence, even Rav Adbarav would agree that if the makif is a lav bar chiyuv, but the nikaf is still chayav. And hence we need Essay Dochalosa to allow the makif to cut the hair of the nikaf. Beis Halevi says, but in the context of Essay Dochalosa, why should you violate both the lav vis-a-vis the nikaf and as well on the makif? At least cut. Wanted to avoid a violation of the lav of the makif and set it up that the makif is a lav makif. Yesh lomar she'af ha'makif mekayim mitzvah b'tiglachas mitzvah. And this is what I call thinking out of the box. I would never in my mind have entertained that the way to get out of this maze is by insisting that the makif, not only the nikaf, is obligated and fulfills a mitzvah. What's going on here? The makif is not a mitzvah. You're saying, why do we need Ruvain, who's a gadol and he's a bar chiyuva, to do the hekef? Why not invite his wife to do the makif? because she's not a bar chiyuva, then what you're doing is you're undermining Ruvain, the makif, the potential makif's mitzvah, his opportunity to fulfill a mitzvah. Esei dochalosas means that if you can find another way in which this person will fulfill his essay without violating the law, then we don't apply essay dochalosas. But to rob that person of the opportunity to do the mitzvah by avoiding the lotas, and that we don't say. You don't rob him of his opportunity to do the mitzvah. And therefore, if Reuven could be makif the mitzvah, and in doing so he fulfills a mitzvah of makif mitzvah, Rosh Hashanah mitzvah, tiglachas mitzvah, then by pushing him out of the picture and inviting his wife for a katan, that's not Efshel L'Kaim Shneim. Efshel L'Kaim Shneim means that this person could achieve his mitzvah without violating the law. But again, the very premise of the Beis Halevi that the makif is L'Kayim a mitzvah, not just the nikav. That's pretty impressive. You see that a kasha could lead to new halachic principles and conclusions. You could derive new breakthrough shittas. I mean, no one would have entertained the idea that the makif, who's not a mitzvah, and again, maybe it's a mitzvah chesed. It's very nice that the nikav can't do it on his own. He doesn't have a mirror, but or he's not a professional barber. But I don't know if you need. But the makif is not makayim the mitzvah of tiglachas mitzvah. Pretty way out. Now we'll fast forward 2 generations from the Beis Halevi to the Imrei Moshe. As I mentioned to you a little bit way back, the Imrei Moshe is a Talmud of Reb Chaim. He says the following. I'm going to prove to you that the mitzvah of tiglachas and mitzorah has to be fulfilled through a kohen. The Rambam tells you on the bottom here that the Rambam is in Tumas Tzaras, Perek Yud Aleph, Halacha Gimel. Okay, so let's see if we can grant this premise that, according to the Rambam at least, the mitzvah of tiglachas mitzorah is incumbent upon the Kohen. The Kohen is very much involved. He's the prime mover in taras hamitzorah, and tiglachas hamitzorah, once upgraded to the status of a mitzvah, is also within the domain of the Kohen. He's also considered the makayim mitzvahs tiglachas. It's not just the nikav; it's also the makayim. Now, Tosas asks a kasha, according to Rav Adabar Alpha, why not have a katan or an isha or a nachri do the maisa kofa? That was Tosas' kasha. What do you mean? Tosas raised such a kasha. You need a kohen. Those the Beis Halevi was assuming in his kasha that we should invite a katan or an isha to do the hakafa of the mitzora, and therefore avoid violating, at least as far as the makif is concerned, the isur lava lo sakifu. And he answers no, because the makif is chayiv in the mitzvah. But wait a second. Tosas's kasha was that why is there an essay dofa losa say here? The nikaf is not even going to violate the losa said because the hekesh of radu barav in a case where the makif is not a bar chiyuva. Now, how could Tosas ask such a question if the Beis Halevi is right that the makif is being makayim a mitzvah, and you can't deny the makif the opportunity to fulfill the mitzvah? That's the Beis Halevi. And yet Tosas says, why not invite an Ish or a Katan to do the hakaf? And clearly they don't have the status of a Kohen. You're robbing the Kohen of his mitzvah. Ela behechrech, shehukshalem, shigalech hakoten es hapeos, the achakach yikayim hakohen es mitzvah b'shar saros rosh. The Moshe reinterprets the Kash of Tosas. Tosas didn't mean to say that let the katan or the isha do the entire hakafa from soup to nuts. That couldn't be because we require a kohen to do this mitzvah. But the answer is they'll prepare the way for the kohen. They're going to start the hakafa, but they won't complete it. And the completion of the hakafa, the total tiglachas, will be achieved by a kohen who's going to take over. It reminds me of Mila. Sometimes you could have the Avia Ben, start the Mila and someone else will finish the Mila. You could split up the mitzvah into parts. So why don't we split up the mitzvah of Hakafas Rosho, meaning Tiglachas, of a mitzorin that is being mitayr himself, and the katan will do the beginning of the mitzvah. And obviously the katan is not a kohen, therefore cannot fulfill this mitzvah, but the kohen will take over and finish the mitzvah. Yigalech hakoten es peos, v'achkach yikayim hakohen es mitzvah b'shar saros rosh. Im kein shuv hadra kuche l'tukta uma hoilu b'teirutza sharei aflo maskonas divreihem shanikaf over af kshakotan megalcho mikom makom yakifenu hakotan kidei limona mi'isra mak b'tiskayim ha-mitzvah al yidei kohen b'shar ha-seor. And the Rosh is assuming, I don't know if it's such a simple premise, that once we have the katan begin the hakafa, then there will be no violation of hakafa, even though the kohen completes the hakafa. Right? He says that as far as the mitzvah of kohen is concerned, he can be mekayim the mitzvah b'shar sa'aros rosh. But that will not be a violation of makif because he's already created the hakaf, the payos. ולכן יש לתרץ שלפי האמס כשהניקף עובר גם שהמקיף אינו בר חיובה, that's Tosas's answer. Is צורך שקיפנו דווקא כהן, כדי שתזכאי מצוות תגלחס גם בפר. שאם יקיפנו קטן לא תזכאי מצוות בהקפה, ולא יהיה מה שידחה אס איסור הניקף. And he says the following, that in order to apply Esitom Philosophy, so we need to be Makayim the mitzvah, not only in the Shar Saros, but also in the basic Peah. And therefore, if the Makif is a Katan or an Isha, We're going to need that the hakafa be a Kohen in order to set up a mitzvah to galachas on the payah as well. Okay, Rabbi, let's go back now to Daf Hey Amud Beis. So let's try to derive Esei Dochalosasa from Mila, that Mila overrides the Shabbos. And this would teach me that Esei Dochalosa applies even in a Lotas HaSheish Bo Kares. We rejected that because Nichrusu Aleh Shlosh Tzoi Bristos. Let's derive Esei Dochalosa Sheish Bo Kares from Korban Pesach, that Pesach overrides the Shabbos. No, we can't derive it from Pesach because Pesach is an essay Sheish Bo Kares, and an upgraded essay of that sort, there are only two of them in the entire Torah, that could override a Lotas Sheish Bo Kares. Let's derive Esei Dochalosa Sheish Bo Kares from Tamid, because we bring the Korban Tamid even on Shabbos. And the Gemara answers that Tamid is an upgraded mitzvah because of its status as Tadir. Which means that every day, twice a day, Boker and Erev, we bring a Korban Tamid. Such a mitzvah could be doche even a Lotas HaSheish Bo Kares like Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Michadalo Asya Teise Mitarte. Let's try a tzara shov. Right? Whenever we have a pircha on A and a different pircha on B, we join forces between A and B, and they can teach me C, and you can't use the pircha against A because of B, etc. Which two of these three mitzvos that a Docha Shabbos shall we join together as a partnership deal? If you're going to tell me, Mi Milo, Mi Pesach, these are the two mitzvahs I say that are upgraded to the level of Chiv Kares. If someone desists from Milo or from Korban Pesach, he's Chayiv Kares. And with regard to an essay Sheish Bo Kares, that could override a Losas Sheish Bo Kares, but it doesn't prove anything about Yibum, which is only an essay, it's not a Kares. So therefore, we have a common pircha on the common Nalfusa of Mila and Pesach. How about Pesach with Tamid? That seems like a pretty good combination because the pircha of Kares would only apply to Pesach and not to Tamid. And the pircha of Tadir would apply to the Korban Tamid, but not the Korban Pesach. Where it says there's one common pircha that can knock off both Pesach and Tamid, and that is it's all Tzorech Gavor. In other words, when you talk about Korbanos that are brought in the Mizbeach, the Torah is going to be much more flexible and allow for overriding a Lotas for the sake of the Korban on the Mizbeach. Another essay, which is not involved in Mizbeach, it's not called Tzorech Gavor, would not have the power to override a Lotas. Now, if you take a look at Tosas, Dibra Maskal Mikulu, I'm just going to point out this Tosas to you. I don't have any clue what he means. But just for the record, he says that even in the case of Pesach, we can have a pircha of Tamid. Now, wait a minute, Pesach is once a year. I'm sorry, did I say Tamid? I meant to say Tadir, the same pircha that we have for Tamid, we can apply to Pesach because it is Tadir. Why is Pesach called Tadir if it's once a year? The Tosfos says because it's ba b'kvirus all shana v'shana. Anything that has a specific calendar date every year annually is called Tadir, even if it's once a year. I can't figure that out. Why does Tosfos identify Tadir as kvirus? I don't know. Now the Gemara says, how about Mimila Vitamid? My Mila is not a tzar kavod, no carbon. So that this pircha that we had in Pesach and Tadir no longer applies to Mila and Tamid. And Mila does not have a Yom Kavua, and therefore it's not Tadir. So even if you'll reject the derivation of Tamid because it's Tadir, I will introduce Mila as we do in a Tzad Shabbat. And you see that even if it's not Tadir, nevertheless it overrides the Shabbos. And what are you going to tell me that I have a pircha on Mila because Mila is Nichrisu Aleh Shloshesrei Brisos? Then I'll quote to you the case of Tamid, which likewise overrides the Shabbos. Okay. Now Tosfos has this whole relativity theory about Tadir, and it's very difficult. Tosfos says that Mila, relative to Yibum, is called Tadir. Because the Torah says, V'yom hashmini yimol b'sar or lost. Again, even though I can't tell you on any, you give me a calendar, I can't pinpoint any calendar date that this mitzvah meal is kavua, but nevertheless, since it's the eighth day, it has an element of kvius as opposed to yibum, which could happen any time, any day. Still says basically the Gemara could have established the pircha on Pesach, on Mila and Tamid by saying it's Tadir in a relativity sense. But the Gemara is looking for a better pircha. So what's the pircha? Shekain yeshno lifnei hadibur. What does that mean? Before Har Sinai, before Matan Torah. So we know that Mila was given to Avraham Avinu. That's one thing. Even though, again, not sure that the mitzvah Mila that was given to Avraham Avinu is identical with the mitzvah Mila that was given at Matan Torah. That I don't know. Sorry, we'll get back to that. But why is carbon tadir, tamid, considered yeshno lifnei adibur? So the Gemara answers, Aliba demandi Omar, Ola shekriva Yisrael b'midbar. So now we have a parsha at the end of Mishpatim, which says that the Nare Bnei Yisrael brought olos. I'll read to you the pasuk. It says, "Vayichov Moses kol divrei Hashem vayeshkem baboker, vayiven mizbeach tachas hahor, vayishlach es Nare Bnei Yisrael vayalu olos." What were these karbanos of olos? They were the carbon tamid. And this took place before Matan Torah. Just 1 second. Right, so it says a book of Torah, but the Ramban says that this took place on the 7th of Sivan. How's the Ramban going to learn this sugi? If he no, he doesn't ask it. Give me a second. I want to clean. Ramban says that this whole parasha took place after. Because the Ramban is allergic to ein mukta rucha b'torah. Nothing here in the footnotes. All right. I don't know where to, I don't even know where to look for an answer to this question. Oh, so the Gemara says that this upgrades the status of both Mila and Korban Tamid because these two mitzvahs were fulfilled even before Matan Torah. So now we cannot derive Essay Dochalosa from any two out of the three. We tried every single combination. However, what if we combine all three together? It's a whole new perspective on Tzad HaShavah. And the Gemara is assuming that Tzad HaShavah doesn't mean A plus B. It could be A plus B plus C. I mean, Adarabah, that even strengthens the Tzad HaShavah. So we're going to add now Mila and Pesach plus Tamid. Umikulu Nami. Now we have to find a pircha that rejects all three. Shekain Yeshnon Lifnei Adibu. So it means that in Pesach Mitzrayim, they brought the Korban Pesach, who was way before Kabbalah Satorah, at least 7 weeks before Kabbalah. So we now establish that Tamid was brought at the end of Parshas Mishpatim before Matan Torah. Something like Rashi, it was on the 5th of Sivan, let's say. And Mila, for sure, is before Matan Torah. Already Avraham Avinu was doing Mila. And now we're saying that the Korban Pesach was also brought before Matan Torah. So if there's a pircha called Lifnei Adibur, that's going to apply to all three of them. And now we're going to get to the sugya that I've been waiting for quite a while. And that's the sugya of Kibbut Av Ha'em. In the context of Kibbut Av Ha'em, there's a havamina, a mind-boggling havamina, that for the sake of this mitzvah, I would override the Shabbos. So if my parent says to me, cook for me, or shecht an animal for me on Shabbos, I would have to do so. The Gemara is going to derive l'maskara that that's not so from a hekech between the mitzvah of Kibbut Av Ha'em and the mitzvah of Shmirat Shabbos. Shamsosai tishmaru. Kulchem chayovim b'kvodi, we'll see the drasha. But in the absence of that special drasha, Chazal assume that the reason why the Torah had to set up this drasha and teach it to us is because essay would be dochalosas. And the essay of Kibbut Av Ha'em was given in the Aseres HaDibros at Matan Torah, and it wasn't called a Adibur. And there's no Yud Gimel Brisos, and it's not Tzorach Kavod. So all the pirchas that we raised would not apply to Kibbut Av Ha'em. Now, if Kibbut Av Ha'em in theory, meaning before the extra Joshua, would override Shabbos, then you see that Esei Dochalosas applies even in a Losa Sheshbo Karas. Ela Itzur. Why do I need the word Aleha in the case of Yibum, of an Achos Ishto, to teach me that the essay of Yibum cannot override the Erev and the Lav of Kares? Salkadai Techabina, Tesi be kibbut avayim. Now again, we don't know yet at this point that there's a hekesh between kibbut avayim and kvod hamokum. So we're looking at kibbut avayim like yibum, like any other mitzvah amongst the Taryag mitzvahs. Isanya yochel yehi kibbut avayim docha Shabbos. Unbelievable. If you didn't read this to me from Yevamot Staf Heyavit Beis, I would tell you you're crazy. This could not appear anywhere in Shabbos. That because my father wants me to shecht an animal on Shabbos, I should comply and override the Shabbos. So mind-boggling harmony. I'm giving a series now on the laws of Shabbos. So one of the things I pointed out over and over again in the Shir is that Shabbos is like a separate entity. It's the essence of a Jew. It's the os beini u'beinechem. Therefore, the Gemara says that a violator of Shabbos is not considered part of the os, and he's like a kofer be'ikar. And if he violates the Shabbos, he's denying creation. There's no os. Chas v'shalom. Shabbos shkula keneged kol mitzvahs. And yet, kibbut avayim would override the Shabbos. Late plan. Talmud Lomar, but for that we have a special Yalfusa. Ish imo v'aviv tiro. And then, in the same breath, v'yeshav sosei tishmoru, ani Hashem. Kulchem chayom b'chvod. So it means that Shabbos is kvod Hashem, Shmir Shabbos is kvod Hashem, and there's a special, shall we say, upgraded status to Shabbos. And that's why the Shabbos is added here, tag on to Kibbut Avayim, to teach that as great as Kibbut Avayim is, it cannot override the Shabbos. So the Gemara says, "My love, the Omer shchotli basheli, and Taima the Kosar Amon Hashem Soseshvara love hachi dachi." You hear these words. I mean, I shudder to even translate the Gemara into English. And I would say, if not for the fact that the Torah added Eshav Sosei Tishmor Ani Hashem, that my father could tell me to cook and bake and check that animal on Shabbos. Alav hachidachi. I mean, it seems to me that at this point, if my father would ask me to build a building for him on Yontif, I would do so. Because Meleches Binyan is a lav which is not included in Eshav Sosei Tishmor. Or for that matter, if my father would ask me to be makif his rosh, which is a lav, then I would override every lav in the Torah. Because I say Dochalosis. Not only that, it would seem that the Gemara is assuming that my father's kibbut av would override a lotus ashishmo kares, with the exception of Shabbos, because of Eshav Sosei Tishmor Ani Hashem. Pretty amazing harmony. And the Gemara rejects. The Gemara says, "Lo, not the way you thought." That the Torah is coming to exclude a possibility that the son would do a malacha and violate a chiyuv kares for the sake of kibbud av ha'em. No, no, no. The pasuk is talking about something else. Not a malacha and a chiyuv kares, but rather lav dimachamer on the top of that vav hamanah. So b'lineda tomorrow, that's going to be our job to analyze the difference between a malacha and the lav dimachamer. But I still want to go back to some of the previous attempts of the Gemara to derive Esei Dochalosis. So even though officially we're safe landing on Daf Vav, I'm still very much on Daf Dalet Amud Beis, Hey Amud Aleph, Hey Amud Beis. Okay then, so I wish you all a great day. Thank you so much.